Hi all, welcome so much to Naturalist 101 webinar. I'm so excited to have you guys all joining us this evening. I'm Stephanie, I'm the Education Coordinator here at 100 Miles, and we are so excited to do our second Naturalist 101 webinar. Tonight though, this is one we were planned to do in April, and now we have postponed it. Also because the legislative session has gotten postponed. So we're really excited that Megan and Alex are on the call tonight, and they're gonna tell us all the updates from what we've learned this year and also what we're going to do forward. So I am going to turn it over to them because that's why you're here tonight, but thank you all for joining us. Also, I wanna point out there is a chat at the bottom, so if you have questions in your head that come up, put them in that chat while we're going, but at the end I am going to open it up so you guys can ask questions and interact, because we do want to have you guys be able to ask questions and realize what we're still working on here at 100 Miles during this time. So without further ado, I think Alex is going to start. So I'll see you at the end.
There's a hand up, but we're going to keep moving, and Stephanie's going to kind of manage our tech support while I'm going to talk. So my name is Alex. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator with 100 Miles, and lucky for me, that means I get to spend a lot of my time in Atlanta during the legislative session and working with our partners while we're out there and the legislators as well. So a lot of people think of 100 Miles as working specifically on the coast, and of course we do a lot of that, and I think we've worked with a lot of you joining us tonight as well in the community. But we like to say that our sweet spot, in addition to local advocacy, is also taking the coast to the capital, so working in Atlanta on state level legislation. And we're not doing that up there all alone or all by ourselves. We're very lucky to be a part of a team called the Georgia Water Coalition. And within the Georgia Water Coalition, we've got a network of advocates and lobbyists from some of the leading conservation organizations in Georgia. So we partner and we meet weekly, if not daily, with individuals from the Southern Environmental Law Center, the River Keepers, Sierra Club, Georgia Conservation Voters, as well as a lot of other organizations like Georgia Garden Club that are helping to lead the way to get environmental policies passed in Georgia that are going to make a difference. Where 100 Miles differs from a lot of those organizations is that we have the responsibility and the privilege to represent the coast in Atlanta, and a lot of these organizations don't have that same part of their mission. They're not working on the coast. And so we pay attention to Georgia Water Coalition priorities, but we also pay close attention to what's happening on the coast and what we need to work on what's happening in Atlanta. And then the other thing that we want to make sure to do is to have a way, or to be that outlet for people who want to get engaged in Atlanta, but are all the way down here, letting them know when there might be a chance for them to come up to testify at a committee hearing, or when to set up meetings with their legislators. Most people don't like sitting around reading legislation, believe it or not, or reading bills. So we're really lucky here at 100 Miles that we enjoy doing that, and then we get to relay all that information to our members and to the public, and make sure that you guys are aware of opportunities to engage with our legislators in Atlanta. And that's always the most impactful way to get involved with the legislative session. In the past, we've worked with growers, oyster growers, when the bill to make mariculture legal in Georgia. We brought, I think it was about 10 oyster farmers up to the Capitol and walked around with them to make sure they got in front of committee members. We've worked with farmers with the Right to Farm bill. And then we've also, this year, we're able to work with our partners at the Coalition to Save Butler Island Plantation to make sure they got up to speak to several senators before that bill could get passed. So that's a really important part of the work we're doing in Atlanta. So it's not just Megan and I up there, we're working with our partners at the Georgia Water Coalition, and we're also doing everything we can to get residents from the coast up to Atlanta. Today, what we're gonna go through, just before I jump into what we worked on this year, I wanted to make sure everyone's somewhat familiar with this process, and if Schoolhouse Rock isn't fresh in your mind, this will be a good reminder. So the way our legislation works is the first step is that a bill needs to get introduced, and typically what will happen is a community organization or a community resident will reach out to their legislators. Sometimes it might be a department bill, so the department of the state has an idea of what they want to change or pass. And so a bill needs to get a sponsor, which is a legislator, either in the Senate or the House, and it needs to get written by legislative council, and then it needs to be introduced. So that's the first step. And as advocates, that's for us kind of the most important step, because that means the ball is rolling. There's a sponsor interested in helping us move our legislation forward that we would like to see passed. Once it's introduced, it'll get assigned to a committee. So typically with the bills we're working with the Natural Resources and Environment Committee. However, in the past few years, we've worked with the Game, Fish, and Parks, I believe, as well as the Insurance Committee, local government. So there, it doesn't always go to House Natural Resources and Environment or Senate Natural Resources and Environment. Once it's in the committee, it'll get a hearing and a vote. That is our time to make sure that our voices are heard as we can testify at those committee meetings, either in favor of or against a bill. And we always want to make sure it gets a vote. Oftentimes things can die in committee because they'll get a hearing, but they won't get a vote and actually be moved out into the Rules Committee, which are our gatekeepers. They decide when things are going to get voted on the floor. And then once it hits the chamber floor, whether it's the Senate or the House, it can get amended there. It could also get amended in its committee. So it can get changed there, or they can pass it as is, or they can choose not to pass it. If that gets done and they do choose to pass it in some form before crossover day, this whole process starts over in the other chamber. So again, it'll get assigned to a committee and move through with a hearing and a vote, and then hopefully on through rules to the chamber floor. There's a few ways that things can unfold, and so I think it's important for you guys to know, as people who are active and engaged in the legislative process from either afar from Atlanta, that will sometimes ask you to reach out to a committee member and say, we need, they're voting today on this bill, we need you to help us get it passed, and then we'll come back a few weeks later and ask you for the same exact thing. But knowing that, at one point it was in the House and now it's in the Senate, or maybe it was in committee and now it's on the full floor, that's just important to know. So even if you've already sent something, sometimes keep in mind that you might need to send that same email just to a different person, a different target. Once things get through and they get to the floor, they could, like I said, they could always be voted on the floor and either pass or die. It can also be amended, and if it gets through crossover day and it passes the next chamber, but there's changes made to it, it then has to go back to its original chamber that it came from, and they either have to agree or they cannot agree to it. And then the last thing is it can still pass its first chamber and get sent over, but it may never get a hearing and a vote in its committee, which we did have. We've had stuff like that happen before, so then it dies in its committee. So it's a long process, and sometimes it may seem repetitive when we're asking you to stay involved and advocate, but we try to be very targeted with our asks and make sure that they're always useful and it's always efficient. So that is just a quick run through of how the process works. And now I'm going to cover a little bit what we're going to talk about today and how we've set it up. So you can see that this year was, we felt a great legislative session for us. We had quite a few wins. So we'll talk about trust funds first and the funding of how we are going to be able to utilize those dedicated funds for what they're supposed to be used for. The Right to Harm Bill, which was amendments to the Right to Farm Bill. The Public Heritage Preserves Bill, they tried to make some changes to that, so you'll hear more about that from Megan. And then we'll talk about coal ash cleanup. So those are all things that we were pretty happy with the outcomes this year. Then we'll move into losses. And so the Satilla River Protection Bill was something well. And unfortunately it didn't move, but again, it wasn't, nothing bad happened from it. It just wasn't the outcome we wanted. And then finally, looking into 2021, we'll talk a little bit about where we see ourselves headed and our efforts headed, and we hope that you'll join us along and find these topics really interesting. So with that, I'm going to move on to talking about trust funds. And this is exciting because this is something the Georgia Water Coalition has worked on for years. And we finally got this passed this year. It will be on the ballot in November because it requires a constitutional amendment in order to allow fees that are collected for a specific purpose to be dedicated by the General Assembly in the budget for that purpose. So, sorry, technical difficulty. So that amendment will be on your ballot in November, and we hope that you'll vote yes on that. And so examples of this would be your license plate fees for the wildlife license plates. When you pay for tires, clearly you can see in our Scrap-It-All picture, we're referring to the tire fees that you pay to dispose of your tires and get new tires. Also tipping fees at landfills. And even when you get a speeding ticket or some sort of traffic violation, there was a law passed called Andrew's Law, and some of the money collected is actually supposed to be given toward driver's education. With the way the Constitution is written right now, those funds cannot be directed specifically to that intended purpose. So this is really important and would open a lot of new funding doors for things like cleaning up hazardous waste sites, cleaning up illegal dumps with tires, things that as voters and as community members, we think they're being funded when we pay that fee, but right now the General Assembly does not have the power to actually dedicate that funding specifically for that purpose. So it did pass this year, and we supported it, and we're going to continue working on it in the fall to make sure that community members are aware of what the amendment would actually do. So if that's something you're interested in helping us spread awareness about, we would love to hear from you and see what we can do and how we can collaborate. And I'm going to change it over to Megan, and she's going to move on to talking about
HB 545. Uh-oh, I think Alex froze. Okay, well, I'm just going to move on.
Hey, Megan, I think you're on mute.
No. Can you hear me? I'm not on mute.
Oh, Megan is good. Please, I think you can hear her.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Send me a message or show me a sign if you can hear me. Y'all? Okay, good. I can see Alex. All right, good. Sorry. So I actually am in California. And just so you know, my family and I rented an RV 2 weeks ago, and we have been driving across country visiting national parks. And we've been really having a good time. I'm at a friend's house right now. And I'm just so glad to be reconnected with everybody here. I wanted to let you know about the right to harm bill. So just to give you a little bit of background, so Georgia has for a couple of decades had in place something called a right to farm bill. And originally it was to protect farms, right? So farms are good. Rural economic development relies on agriculture. These are things that we know. Another thing that we know is that sometimes residential developments or industrial developments newly proposed can come in and threaten agriculture, because agriculture sometimes isn't the most nice smelling or nice sounding operation. And what we try and do is protect those farms, because farms protect rural economies. And but the other thing that we know is that sometimes farms can be bad. If they get too big or they pollute, sometimes they can be bad. And so the right to farm bill prevented new developments from coming in and suing farmers for being a nuisance, because maybe they smell bad or maybe there are a lot of flies. But that has all been done under the premise that farms are not stepping on the rights of existing property owners. So let me just reclassify what I just said, in that we wanted the right to farm bill protects existing farms from new land uses coming in and saying, oh, these farms are a negligence or a nuisance. And so therefore, not a negligence, a nuisance. And so therefore we don't like the smell, so we're filing a lawsuit. However, flipping that, the right to harm bill, which was HB 545, allowed for new farms to come in, like maybe a consolidated animal feeding operation, or this picture here is actually not a picture of a beautiful sunrise. It's a picture of a new greenhouse that has come into Monroe County in Georgia. And inflicting on the rights or violating the rights of existing property owners. So the right to harm bill allows new farming operations or existing farming operations to expand and get bigger and get noisier or smellier. And it prevents existing property owners from coming in and saying, this is a nuisance to our way of life. So as you know, many people move out to rural places to be quiet and be dark and be pleasant. And this new law would have prevented those property owners from being able to protect their rights. So also to be clear, an agricultural operation by definition includes a farm, a vegetable farm, a fruit farm, an orchard. It also includes the act of spraying pesticides or fertilizers. It also includes keeping livestock and slaughtering livestock and breeding livestock. It also could include honeybees, food processing, timber harvesting, even like a meat processing plant or a mill, a logging mill. So these are places that we want to protect because they protect our rural environments. What we don't want to protect are new operations coming in, like consolidated feeding operations, or like this place in Monroe County that has now been deemed a nightmare. And so the story here is that the right to farm bill, or the right to farm law, which is not HB 545, but is the existing law, allows the residents who live around this area, and in fact, it's been noted that a resident 2 miles away can read a newspaper at midnight because of the light coming from this operation in this rural area. It allows them the ability to sue this landowner as a nuisance. However, what HB 545 would have done if the light mayor would have come in after this bill had passed, it would not have given that property owner the right to sue the new landowner from coming in and producing this amount of light. So we opposed this bill, and thankfully the bill did not pass through, it did pass through the House, but it did not, and it passed through the Senate in an amended way, but it did not get accepted by the House, and so the bill died before crossover day. Next slide, please. The other, we worked on 2 other bills that I'm going to talk about. One is kind of a last minute bill that we worked on in the last few weeks of the session, which were in June. HB 906. So we have in Georgia, we have existing places that are called heritage preserves, and mostly they're managed as wildlife management areas by the Department of Natural Resources. But these heritage preserves are protected because of the role that these properties play in Georgia's history. This is an example of Butler Island Plantation in McIntosh County. It is designated as a heritage preserve, which is the Altamaha River Wildlife Management Area. But there's a property, a home on the property that is it wasn't Pierce Butler's home, but it was built in the 1920s, and it's historic. And we want to preserve it because it's important. But Department of Natural Resources doesn't have funding necessarily to restore buildings, and really they shouldn't. They're managing wildlife management areas, and the heritage preserves, the improvements on the property sometimes fall into disrepair. So there's a very real problem the Department of Natural Resources faces with maintaining and preserving these historic sites and properties all over the state, not just here. Ossabaw Island is another example of one. And so we understood that there was a real and existing threat to these properties, especially Butler Island, in that a private developer wanted to come in, or a private interest wanted to come in and purchase this property to be made into a brewery or a distillery, or different things that the DNR was managing the inquiries about. So when this bill got introduced, our main issue was not that DNR wanted to find a way to maintain these historic sites, but rather that they were thinking of transferring these historic buildings like Butler Island Plantation or the house on Ossabaw potentially into private hands, to take them out of public access. Now, each of these properties are limited in terms of, and they're all different in terms of how much the public has access to them. But the idea of taking them out of any public access at all and putting them into private entities' hands for the purpose of for-profit endeavors, or, you know, potentially somebody could have made Butler Island their home, or in any case, anywhere across the state, they could have made any of these properties a hunting preserve up to 15 acres, was problematic for us. We believe that if the state has a property, there should be no net loss in public access, of even regardless of whether the property has a building on it or not. And so we opposed this bill. We worked with members all across the state and also grassroots in McIntosh County to oppose the bill. The bill made it through crossover day, but it died in the Senate at the end of the session, which you probably know, and Alex probably said, and that the session restarted in the middle of June, and it ended before July 1st. So the bill never got taken up by the Senate. It died in the Senate, which was a good thing. You can move on to the next slide. And finally, if you've been following 100 Miles Agenda for the last few years, you've been hearing us talk about coal ash. And you know that coal ash is, coal combustion is not just a problem for greenhouse gas emissions, because in the 1980s, the EPA mandated scrubbers to be installed into all smokestacks of coal burning facilities. And so as a result, coal ash now falls to the bottom of the scrubber, and power companies have had to come up with a way to dispose of that coal ash. Their solution has been to wet the ash down, and they store it in ash ponds across the state of Georgia and across the country. Well, those ash ponds have now been deemed to leak. We've been storing ash in ash ponds for 30 years or so. And we now know that ash from ash ponds, because the ponds are unlined, leak into groundwater and often drinking water wells. So we've been working with the Water Coalition and others over the past few years to come up with solutions for long-term storage of coal ash in a way that protects our water bodies. And right now, Georgia Power, who has 80 million tons of coal ash, can store it in one of three ways. I mean, they can store it in all of these ways, but all of their coal ash is stored in one of these three ways. One is they can store it in ash ponds. And what they're doing right now is draining the ash ponds to move the coal ash into one of the other two facilities. One is a municipal solid waste landfill, which are the same landfills that store our household waste, like our banana peels and our paper towels and, you know, whatever we throw in our trash can that gets picked up every whatever day of the week. And then the third way is they can store it in lined facilities on their own property. So we've been working on bills to address each of these three options. SB 123, which deals with coal ash coming into municipal solid waste landfills, is the one that got some traction this year. So we talk about Georgia Power a lot because that's where most of our coal ash comes from in Georgia, and that's the coal ash that we produce as electricity consumers. But the other issue is that many states around us in the Southeast have more stringent laws than we have. And therefore, if Georgia's laws are more loose, then North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama are looking to ship their coal ash into other states that have less stringent requirements for storage. So in 2018, there was a loophole passed for coal ash that allowed coal ash to be stored at $1 per ton in Georgia's municipal solid waste landfills, whereas other types of waste in Georgia's municipal solid waste landfills cost $2.50 per ton, and that money would then go to the counties. So Senator Ligon in Brunswick decided that he needed to make it equal because he didn't want municipal solid waste landfill owners to attract coal ash dumping places from other states, or utilities in other words, to come and store their coal ash in municipal solid waste landfills. So at this point in time now, all of the waste coming into Georgia, whether it's being stored by Georgia Power or other states, costs $2.50. I don't know why I keep saying 50%. 50 cents per ton to come into Georgia and into our municipal solid waste landfills. You know, our issue is that these municipal solid waste landfills are important resources for our communities. They're important resources for us. and they're lined. So we want to make sure that the waste that we're generating in our homes, which is the waste that these municipal solid waste landfills were established to store, is what they are storing, and that coal ash isn't incentivized to come into the state and be stored in these important community resources. So I'll answer questions about these later, but I wanted to just let you know that these were all victories that we experienced this legislative session, and we would not have experienced them if not for our activists and our members who communicated with their legislative officials and let them know that these issues matter to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex now to continue the conversation.
All right, I think we've got it figured out now. So I am going to move on to what we consider to be a loss, and it's not that a bad bill passed, but it's just that something we wanted passed did not make it through. So SB 384 was another bill introduced by Senator Ligon, and it also had to do with municipal landfills and solid waste management. And it's much more specific than the SB 123 and coal ash bills that really relate to our entire state. This bill is specific to the Satilla River and protection that it would have granted the river and the corridor from a landfill that is being proposed in Brantley County. And so this landfill is being proposed within 2 miles of the Satilla River, and it's in an area that is not only very close to a lot of community institutions like schools and churches, but it's also in wetlands and a frequently flooded area. So this is certainly not the place where we want to see a landfill placed due to leachate contamination. But like Megan was saying, we also are considering coal combustion residuals as well. So SB 384 addressed not only landfills that would be taking municipal solid waste, but it also would have prohibited any landfills that would be accepting coal ash as well within 3 miles of the Satilla River. Now the bill, it's interesting, did not specifically call out the Satilla River, but rather utilize geography and science to specifically dive into, no pun intended, dive into the Satilla River, or like just look at the scope of the Satilla River. So it relates only to blackwater rivers that originated in the coastal plain. So the only river that fits that description in Georgia is the Satilla River. And so that's how we got around calling out the Satilla River specifically. So it was great to rely on our environmental and naturalist colleagues to really figure out a way to identify how the Satilla River is unique and how we can pull it out to make this bill possible. So like we said, it didn't actually pass the way we wanted it to. It did get through the Senate Natural Resources Environment Committee and got past the floor with a good majority, not unanimous. And then it got passed through the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee, but we did not have the support of the governor on this bill, and therefore it did not move on to the House floor before the end of the session, before July. So it did not pass, and that means that in order to stop this landfill from happening, it's going to go back to Brantley County and rely on them to continue fighting this fight in order to prevent all of the zoning and permitting from happening, which is certainly going to be difficult, but we're going to continue helping the Satilla River Keeper any way we can to ensure that that does not happen in order to protect the Satilla River and the water quality. So that is, again, a very specific bill that didn't pass this year and likely would not be reintroduced in the future since Senator Ligon won't be returning, but we'll continue to work with Satilla River Keeper to make sure that this issue is addressed. And now I'm going to switch into a little bit more about what we're looking into for the future. And all of these are bills that came up this year, and some of them didn't pass because they were kind of put together very quickly, didn't have the community support. Others didn't pass because COVID hit and we didn't really have the bandwidth to get up there and lobby hard for these to get through. And the legislators were, pretty carrying a big burden of making sure the budget passed and things were done to get everybody out home safely. So SB 280 and SB 434 both addressed single-use plastics. And it was strictly single-use plastics, including for SB 434 styrofoam. And what it did is it prohibited the use of single-use plastics in specific retail instances. And it was pretty, ubiquitous where you would think you see single-use plastics today. There were a few exceptions, including dog waste bags could be sold and diaper genie bags. So kind of things where there might be a hygiene issue. Produce bags in the grocery store were still permitted to be used, but not at the checkout counter. The initial bill that was brought before the committee in the Senate was SB 280, and that one did not include styrofoam. It also required that it would be implemented by 2021, which is pretty quick, and didn't leave a lot of time for this to be implemented seamlessly in retail stores, which was not something that the committee was too fond of. There was an interesting debate that happened, or a hearing within the committee, and we had some Republicans that were actually pretty supportive and open to discussing how to improve it. I feel very confident that we will see this come back in the future with some rewrites and something that'll make it much more palatable for where we are at in Georgia right now. SB 434 was different, and I think one of the things we really hope to see in the future, and where I think the Georgia Water Coalition with our partners can help, is making sure that we're reading all of these and ensuring there's, rather than splitting up and having two bills that are trying to do the same thing, making it the best it can be and really getting the efforts behind one bill that has multiple sponsors and hopefully it'll pass. So SB 434 was a little bit more intricate. It also included styrofoam, and it had exceptions for people who were on SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. They were actually allowed to have plastic bags, and for us, looking through that, that means that grocery stores have to keep those plastic bags at the end of the retail as well available for people who are still able by law to use them. So that might not be the most efficient way to go about doing that. But again, it went to the Economic and Tourism Committee of the Senate, and the senators there were very open to discussion. So we're looking forward to helping address this issue, because we now have scientific research that really can pinpoint how many pieces of plastic, I believe it's 14 pieces of plastic, before the mortality of the sea turtle is actually increased due to plastic consumption. So there's no doubt, we've seen the news articles, plastic consumption in marine mammals and marine wildlife is certainly an issue. And we heard from our YELP students, our Youth and Environmental Leadership Program students, when they did a beach cleanup this year, how much plastic they found. So it's no secret that plastic pollution is something that we're all dealing with, and more is something that's coming to the forefront. This bill, like I said, they both died in their committees. They just never received a vote, but they did receive a hearing and had a substantial amount of support. And these are something that we will most certainly be supporting in the future, and hopefully actually working with legislators to help figure out what needs to be in the bill, how to make it work, and then getting advocates behind it to ensure it passes. Looking into 2021 in the future, we're also interested in flood risk reduction funding, and we were very excited this year to be working with Representative Hogan to get HB 1045 introduced, which would have allowed some already existing tax revenue that has restricted uses. It would have added flood risk reduction, including resilience planning, to those permitted uses for that tax revenue in unincorporated areas. So this isn't something that Brunswick could have used if this bill had passed, but it would have been a great, or Tybee, they're incorporated, it wouldn't have worked for them, but it would have been a great first step for St. Simon's Island to start really looking at how to fund some flood risk reduction planning, as well as some infrastructure and projects. We came about this looking at the Shore Protection Act changes that happened last year, which left us feeling unsettled, and we wanted to think through how we could maybe come back to that and improve it. And in that research and in that preparation, we found out that Georgia is one of just 6 coastal states in the nation that does not have an adaptation plan either underway or already formally adopted by the state. And we are the only state along the Atlantic coast that does not have a state-sanctioned council looking into flood risk reduction at the very least, but most of these councils are looking at climate change adaptation as a whole, including sea level rise and flood risk reduction. So while HB 1045 is a great step, there's no doubt that we see a lot of room for improvement for Georgia to begin looking at adaptation and resilience. And one reason that this is something that's pressing and we want to look at in 2021 is FEMA is beginning a new program called the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program. And this means that rather than experiencing a declared disaster and then applying for grant funding to rebuild in a resilient way, we can preemptively apply for funding to rebuild our communities or retrofit our communities to handle flood risks and to handle other forms of adaptation. So these are going to be funds that are available not just to coastal communities, but communities across the country, in the Midwest, on the West Coast, that are trying to become more resilient to whatever climate crises they're facing in the future. The real point to kind of get stuck on is that there's a 25% match requirement, and all of these other states along the coast that already have their councils in place or even have plans in place and funding mechanisms in place to support this type of project, they're going to be able to provide a higher 25% match. So they're going to be able to get more money from FEMA, whereas right now in Georgia, we've really devolved this planning effort and funding effort to local governments, and Tybee and St. Mary's are really leading the way there, especially Tybee. But we feel like the coast is an asset to the entire state. Tourism is huge here, the Georgia Ports Authority, and then not to mention the unique natural resource that it is, not only for our state, but the entire country. And so it's really important that the state share that burden. It's important to us that the state recognize that and help to share that burden of the 25% match to ensure that Georgia's not leaving money on the table and isn't less competitive at receiving funds than these other states that are already working on this process. So HB 1045 would have been a great step, but there's still plenty of work to be done, even if it had passed. It did pass the House. It got out of its committee and passed the House nearly unanimously. However, it did not get out of committee, and it's in the Senate. It never actually even got assigned because the legislature broke pretty much right after crossover day when it did pass. So it never moved. So that'll be something that we're working on more in the future. And overall, we're calling this our SOS or Save Our Shores campaign. And we hope to see several pieces of legislation potentially that could address some of these issues, or one piece of legislation that could hopefully encompass a lot of it. So moving on to our last component of looking forward into 2021, which feels a little bit like looking back because we've been addressing offshore drilling for years. We had HR 48, House Resolution 48 passed last year, which was a tremendous feat. But this year we had SR 88 still alive, since it's a 2-year sessions are run for 2 years. And it did not pass. It didn't even get a hearing or a vote out of committee. And so that's something that we're still trying to work on with our senators is, you know, our coastal senators are very supportive of opposing offshore drilling publicly, but we still need champions along the coast to continue pushing for them to pass SR 88 out of the Senate Natural Resources and Environment Committee. And unfortunately, none of our senators are on that committee from the coast. But we had great interest in a press conference this year. Once again, we did it in 2019 as well with our coastal senators and some senators even from Atlanta stating that this bill needs to get passed. Georgia is the only state that has yet to have a governor come out opposed, or the only coastal state opposed to offshore drilling. Ultimately, the goal of SR 88 and HR 48 is, you know, their resolutions, they're just a statement, a declaration, but we would like to encourage Governor Kemp to formally oppose offshore drilling. He has come out in opposition to it publicly, but he needs to actually submit in writing his stance to the federal government. So we are hoping that that will happen in the near future, and we're going to continue working on that. But we do have commitment from senators. Senator Watson has committed that he would like to see SR 88 reintroduced in 2021, so we'll keep working on that. So like I said, it didn't receive a hearing or a vote in the Senate committee either last year or this year, but we do support it and we're continuing to work on it. So with that, I just want to highlight a few ways that you guys can get involved. Hopefully this wasn't too policy wonky for you and you feel encouraged and engaged to take action on these issues. So if you're wanting to stay at home in this time of COVID, here's some ideas for you to just kind of delve in from home, from either behind a computer screen or pen and paper. Learning about the issue is always important. misinformation is never something that we want to put out there. And so we're always available if you guys have questions or want to, talk about the bill itself and read through it with us. And here where 100 Miles is at on it, you can always reach out to learn about the issues. And we will be launching a new website this year. So that's exciting. It'll be a great resource as well for you to learn about. We'll have fact sheets on there that you can share with your friends. So it'll be a great little snippet to share with people and get the basics of the issue. You can contact your legislators, of course, both via phone or via email or via mail. Sharing our email campaigns. If you don't already follow us on Facebook, please do that. And please share our email campaigns, especially during the legislative session. So what those look like are pre-formatted emails that are, I mentioned, we'll sometimes ask people to send an email and they'll ask you to send what looks like an identical email, several weeks later during the legislative session. Those are pre-formatted and they go to a specific person. So maybe we're targeting the committee first, but then we need to target, your individual senator. And so if you can share those and continue to share those links on Facebook and social media throughout the legislative session, that's really where we see a lot of the impact. And Megan mentioned the grassroots efforts around HB 906 this year, which was the Heritage Preserve Bill. We had over 20,000 emails sent to legislators about that bill, which is huge. Typically 5,000 would be a great number, but 20,000 is huge. So that makes a big difference and really helped to shut that bill down, and it got the legislators' attention. So they go a really long way. Again, writing letters to the editor is great because it just gets the issue out in the community. And so if you feel like you have a message to be said about a bill, please feel free to contact us and we can talk about it. And we would love to see the issues brought up in the paper through letters to the editor. And then finally, of course, if you're interested in these issues, please vote, because the people that we vote for are the people making these decisions. And so we're always, happy to see a good voting turnout so that the coast is represented. And we have people voting in Atlanta who are really truly representing the way we would want them to vote here on the coast. And then going into the future and trying to go the extra mile for 100 miles, next year in 2021, there's always the opportunity, I think that I mentioned, to come up to Atlanta and meet our legislators. And we're happy if that's something you're interested in doing, as long as we have a normal legislative session next year. We have spent time with community members that have been interested in coming up and meeting with their legislators about an issue that we're working on. So please reach out to us if that's something that you're interested in doing. Even better than that is finding a time, you almost have to be on call to be able to do this, because our committee meetings can happen on spur of a moment. But to testify at a committee hearing and explain why you oppose or are in favor of a bill, that's really important, because they hear that usually right before they vote on a bill. We've had people this year that went out and collected petition signatures envelope full of letters signed by people with their addresses from their community. And then the last thing is if you have groups that you're a part of and would like to either share our information and we can help get that to you, or you could ask one of us to join you for an event, and we can, anything from 5 minutes to a full event. We're always happy to kind of share what we're working on and see how we can collaborate. So if you're interested in getting involved, please explore any of those avenues, or if you have another idea, please reach out to either Megan or I. So right now we're going to turn it over to questions, and Stephanie is going to unmute everybody. And if you have questions, feel free to put them into the question and answer box, or you can also, I believe everybody's unmuted at this point, so if you want to just go ahead and speak up, you're welcome to do that too. Oh, hold on. We're still learning. This is a learning process. Megan, will you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay.
Well, I can answer a question while we wait. I got emailed a question earlier today about meetings with legislators. And because of COVID, one of the things that we did when we went up in June is, of course, everybody wears a mask in the Capitol, and there's a COVID testing site right there in the Capitol. But also because of the restrictions on travel, it's understandable that maybe people would want to meet with their legislator here on the coast or in Brunswick or in Savannah or wherever you are. And so it would be great if you wanted to have a phone call or even just a Zoom call or even a socially distanced office meeting with a legislator. Of course, that makes a difference. And so I just wanted to encourage you all to know that you just don't have to go to Atlanta, but there are lots of different ways that we can arrange a meeting with you and your legislator if you want us to be an intermediary there.
So if you tried to ask a question, we're still learning, so thank y'all for bearing with us. If you find the raise your hand function, if you do that, Stephanie can unmute you. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand electronically. Hopefully that works. And I apologize if it's not working. Feel free to use Megan's email down below and email her a question. But Megan, you make a good point. It's not just in Atlanta that we can meet with them, but it's also not just in Atlanta that we can see councils and elected officials pass things that are important to moving these forward. So especially with sea level rise, we're going to be working, we've already started with the city of Tybee, and we've worked with some community advocates down in Camden County to see local resolutions passed supporting action from the state on this issue. So if you're interested in kicking off that effort in your local community and seeing a resolution passed for any of these bills that we discussed tonight that are moving forward into 2021, that's certainly something that we would love to talk to you about as well.
I received a question, and it is about coal ash. And I know I mentioned when I was talking to you about coal ash that SB 123 deals with a certain aspect of coal ash storage, which relates to tipping fees in municipal solid waste landfills. The other aspects of coal ash storage have to do with notification related to the draining of ash ponds, have to do with the lining of coal ash storage facilities long-term, whether they're on utility properties or sometimes utilities cap coal ash ponds and just drain them and then cap them, and they're still not lined, but they need to be. And then the third is water quality testing, groundwater quality testing around ash pond storage facilities. So we're still working on all those bills. Even though we experienced a victory on one, doesn't mean we're stopping on all the others. We're still continuing with all of those.
Someone asked a question about when the 2021 and to 2022 general legislative session starts, or Georgia legislative session starts. So I think, generally it would start in January is typically what it does, and it runs 40 legislative days, so it's typically into the beginning of April. But with COVID, I think we need to, start thinking about how that things may change in the future. It's already really hard for people to engage, especially from the coast, in the actual legislative session at the Capitol. And so this is a good time to start thinking about innovative ways that we can engage from afar and be really effective. So, hopefully things are back to normal and it will begin in January of 2021. But I think we're kind of in all hands on deck mode right now and trying to make sure that we have as much of an impact as possible, since we may not have the opportunity to actually be up there safely at the ropes next year and testifying in committee hearings. Does that sound right to you, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we have to consider is that our governor just eliminated, or I don't know if he even has the ability to do this, but today you saw the news where he eliminated the ability of local governments to ban masks. I mean, who even knows if he has the ability to do that? But the point is that there is a attitude in the state that it's just business as usual, regardless of what pandemic is affecting our globe. And so that does not mean that we as an organization are going to subscribe to that philosophy or mentality. Of course, I want to keep Alex and myself, who we are the two lobbyists, we want to be safe. I want to make sure that none of us are getting sick. And so it's going to require a whole new vision for advocacy, where hopefully our legislators understand the risk that their constituents are putting themselves in if they travel to Atlanta, and they value the the need to not put them in that risk. So we're going to be working with each of our coastal legislators to make sure that they know that even though people may not be willing to or able to travel to Atlanta, that there's still valid input that they have to offer. And so we're going to be trying to figure that out through this whole session, because as you maybe know, if you followed us, we're constantly trying to figure out how to bus people up there, or how to get people up there by arranging carpools, or how to get people to communicate with their legislators in ways that maybe require people not to travel. So anyway, the point is that this era of COVID requires a whole new level of advocacy that requires or maybe validates remote communications without having to be face-to-face wearing a mask.
Yeah, and I think HB 906, the Heritage Preserve Bill, was a great example of this. That was during COVID. It really came to a point, and the grassroots organizing around that and the 25,000 emails that went through had a huge impact.
Yeah.
So it's certainly we can be effective from the coast and from afar. Another question came in, do we plan to do any candidate forums on environmental issues before the November election? We worked really closely with the League of Women Voters out of Savannah last year to do some great candidate forums for their local elections. That is not something we've discussed with our partners yet out of Savannah, and it's something that we haven't discussed as an advocacy team, but it's certainly something I think we will discuss and consider. But again, with COVID, I'm sure we'll consider virtual options, and I don't know if by November we'll be prepared to do anything other than a virtual option.
Yeah, I don't think we would do anything other than a virtual option. But the other thing is that we're always better off when we partner with other groups. And so definitely we'll be working with other groups if they're doing a candidate forum to make sure that questions are asked about environmental issues. Definitely.
Yeah. And the League of Women Voters for the Coast have really charged up. I mean, there are a lot of groups that do candidate forums, of course, and all of them are important, but the caliber that the League of Women Voters sets for their for the candidate forums that they do is really high. And so we've really enjoyed getting to know them as an organization and working with them to learn how those are run so effectively.
So just to go back to the question about when will the 2021 session convene, there's nothing right now that tells us that it would convene any later than normal, which would be the first Monday, the first full week in January. So usually it's like January 9th or January, whatever. We don't have any indication that it's going to be any different than that, and that it would exist. It would be 40 days from that date. Of course, I believe that there will be a lot more virtual meetings, which is actually a good thing, because Atlanta is a far away place from pretty much everywhere else in the state. And so if they could have more public input virtually, I just think that would be a good thing. It would engage more people. It would give an opportunity. Normally, like, you hear there's going to be a committee meeting on Tuesday morning at 9, and then Wednesday afternoon at 3. Oh my gosh, the committee meeting changed from Tuesday morning at 9 to Tuesday at noon, or to Wednesday at 4. And it makes it virtually impossible to travel the long distance to Atlanta from the coast. So.
Yeah, I'd agree. All right, well, we are about time, and I don't know if we have any more questions. Not seeing anything pop up, but I want to encourage you guys to continue to reach out to Megan and I as you look through this. We'll send out the link to these slides so you can go back through and look at them. And please reach out to us if you have any questions or any ideas that you would like to talk about and possibly collaborate on.
Thank you all for participating.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us this evening. Special thanks to Megan and Alex for taking the time to share what we've been working on. So stay tuned. We are moving some more programs to a digital format. So yeah, just if you're not signed up for our MailChimp, that is a great way to hear about upcoming programs. And we hope to continue doing some more Naturalist 101s online as the future comes in this new environment. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, don't forget, you can always reach out to Alex or Megan at any time, or myself. But if not, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.